1 billion USD. That's the approximate budget deficit after the financial crisis in Los Angeles in the spring of 2025. This number not only left a huge hole in an economy once hailed as the cornerstone of American prosperity, but also became a whirlwind that blew thousands of families out of their homes. Those who once wore suits to work in the city center are now setting up makeshift tents right at the foot of luxury skyscrapers. The once glittering Hollywood Boulevard is now filled with the sounds of RV engines running all night to keep warm the residents who have nowhere else to go. The irony is that politicians constantly promise a robust economy, but each round of mass layoffs paints a completely different picture. The question many people in Los Angeles are asking themselves, is this just a temporary stumble or a sign that the Trump-era economy is teetering on the brink? In today's video, we'll follow the trail of cold numbers, personal stories of people who once had homes but lost everything overnight, and political conflicts that have never cooled down. And perhaps you too will have to ask yourself, if this vortex doesn't stop, when will you be the next victim? Perhaps even now, it's hard for anyone to accept the fact that a city that once illuminated so many Hollywood dreams is becoming the epicenter of one of the most severe homelessness crises in the United States. Los Angeles, a symbol of American glamour and dreams, now ranks second only to New York in the number of homeless people. According to the latest statistics, in 2025, Los Angeles County recorded 72,308 homeless people, a decrease of approximately 4% compared to the previous year. The government and officials celebrated this achievement, calling it a remarkable step forward for the second consecutive year. But amidst those words of praise, the 72,000 people still living on the streets tell a completely different story, as this decline is far too small compared to the reality of the crisis engulfing the city. From Sunset Boulevard to the romantic Venice Beach, tents continue to spring up daily like wounds that have never healed. Homelessness is no longer confined to Skid Row, the long-famous homeless slum area, but has spread throughout Los Angeles. A prime example is the Koreatown residential area. Initially, in May, there were only a few small tents erected here. But by September, this place had transformed into a miniature city. Large tents, vegetable gardens, cooking areas, and even a makeshift tennis court. Local residents are expressing their outrage, stating that many homeless people have been stealing electricity from people's homes, running wires across the road, and leaving behind the constant threat of fire and explosions. There are also allegations of illegal transactions, disturbances, and the burning of 2 cars right in front of children in the neighborhood. And that's the reality that the people of Los Angeles face every day, not just a few dry numbers on a statistical table. The origins of this nightmare are multifaceted, but to explain why it persists endlessly and seems to have no end, one cannot overlook 2 vicious cycles: social ills and mental illness. A recent viral video shows a homeless man climbing power lines in Venice, repeatedly shouting that he is affected by a toxic substance, making him unable to control his behavior. That haunting image is not just a bizarre online moment, but also a mirror reflecting the truth. A great many homeless people in LA are living in a state of severe mental illness and receive almost no systemic intervention to salvage their alarming situation. Not to mention the fact that house prices in Los Angeles are ballooning out of control. The latest statistics show that the average salary here has only increased by about 3%, but apartment rental prices have skyrocketed by up to 20% due to high demand and limited supply. That disparity makes the salary increase seem insignificant. How can a worker earning around $17 per hour afford the over $3,000 per month cost of a 1-bedroom apartment, not to mention a host of other living expenses? That question isn't only for those at the very bottom. It's a wake-up call for anyone who still believes they're safe inside the so-called comfort zone. The line between having a roof over your head and losing everything is more fragile than ever. The people of Los Angeles bitterly realize a truth. Just one missed paycheck could send anyone spiraling into homelessness. Perhaps it's time for us to wake up and face this painful reality head-on. Over the past 2 years, approximately 3,000 people have been supported to escape homelessness, a figure worth noting. But that joy was quickly overshadowed by another truth. Every day, more and more new people are drawn into the vortex of homelessness due to rising housing costs and the absence of effective prevention systems. If even an ordinary worker with a stable job can lose their home after just one missed paycheck, then what is even considered safe in this economy? When the Hollywood glamour still shines brightly on billboards, but at their feet lies an entire city of tents, what image of the American dream can we still believe in for future generations? The homelessness crisis in Los Angeles was already strained, but recent financial events are like pouring fuel on an already raging fire. Recently, the City Controller's Office, Controller Kenneth Mejia, announced a budget deficit of nearly $1 billion for fiscal year 2025, double the previous forecast. And like an old refrain, staff cuts is once again mentioned as the final, but also unavoidable option. It is expected that over 1,600 city employees will lose their jobs. This is predicted to be the largest cut since the 2008 crisis. In the press, this was described as an economic shock, but behind the brief headlines lies a social tragedy. Because the billion deficit isn't just on the financial statements, it's gradually turning into demolished homes, opening the door to tragedy for thousands of civil servant families and ordinary workers who once believed they belonged to stability. The image of white-collar workers leaving their offices at the end of the day, stepping out and heading straight to temporary shelters or tents set up in parking lots is no longer a rare sight. A recently laid-off man admitted in desperation, "I never that I would become a victim." Never in the history of Los Angeles has it been so easy to become homeless. Employees who were once proud of their monthly salaries are now like wandering shadows, seeking overnight shelter under the skyscrapers where they used to work. The working homeless, those who still have jobs but can no longer afford rent, will likely soon become the largest group in the city's homeless population. The government acknowledges the risk, but beyond calling for more funding from the state of California, there is no sufficiently robust plan to compensate. Meanwhile, waves of layoffs continue to pour in from the national level. Over 100,000 jobs in the US tech industry disappeared in July 2025 alone. Microsoft cut 10,000 employees. Meta was no exception, laying off an additional 8,000 people despite still investing billions of dollars in data infrastructure. And of course, Los Angeles is not immune to this whirlwind. As AI increasingly replaces humans in many professions, those who lose their jobs are gradually replacing ornamental plants to become a familiar landscape feature of the streets. The waves kept crashing over each other, from budget deficits and civil service layoffs to a nationwide job crisis. It's all like a series of dominoes, making the homelessness crisis in Los Angeles increasingly desperate, like a chessboard where the pawns are always pushed out first. If even those with stable jobs are gradually slipping into a state of homelessness, what will be left to protect the rest of society? When each round of layoffs turns into a new wave of homelessness, what promises of a stable economy can we still believe? In the dazzling light of the billboards on Sunset Boulevard, few would imagine that behind that glamorous facade, hundreds of thousands of residents are facing a harsh survival challenge. The cost of living in Los Angeles has skyrocketed to a level that only a few can afford. If the American dream still exists somewhere, here it has become a luxury privilege. A one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles now has an average monthly rent of over $3,000. Meanwhile, according to data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, the average wage for workers in the city hovers around $7 to $20 per hour, which is less than $3,200 per month if working full-time. That difference means that rent alone consumes almost all of the income. And when you add in the costs of gas, healthcare, food, and insurance, people realize that surviving in LA now feels like running a marathon. The irony is that even if wages improve slightly, the rate of rental price increases still far outpaces them. According to a report by Zillow, rental prices in the Los Angeles area have increased by an average of over 19% in the last 2 years alone. Meanwhile, inflation continues to make the consumer basket increasingly expensive. A loaf of bread, a bottle of milk, or even just a few liters of gasoline, things that were once obvious, have now become burdens. As a result, Los Angeles is becoming a starkly stratified city. On one side are the wealthy who can afford a luxurious lifestyle, and on the other is the majority of residents forced to scrape by to survive. That disparity isn't just reflected in financial records, but is also evident on the streets. Newly built luxury apartments stand right next to RV parking lots where dozens of families are staying overnight. In that context, many experts have warned about the rise of a new social group, working homeless people. These are people who have jobs and income, but still cannot afford the basic costs to maintain a home. And once this class increases, the homelessness crisis will no longer be a story of those on the margins of society, but a direct threat to the ordinary working class. So, what solutions can salvage this? Some politicians mentioned expanding rental assistance programs, while non-profit organizations sought to provide temporary housing. However, many opinions suggest that only strong measures regarding rent control, investment in affordable housing, and comprehensive land policy reform can make a real difference. While awaiting long-term steps, some major corporations have stepped in, such as Amazon and Google, which have announced investments of hundreds of millions of USD in affordable housing projects in California. These are perhaps meager efforts to fill the gaps that the public system still leaves open. But even with those additional investments, the reality remains. Living in Los Angeles today is a privilege that not everyone can afford. And it is this that is pushing the city into a state of imbalance, where on one side there is dazzling luxury, and on the other, the constant fear of being displaced from their own homes. If a city that once symbolized the American dream now makes having a place to live a privilege, what will be left for future generations? And how many more families will have to sacrifice everything just to keep a roof over their heads in this city? On paper, Los Angeles is improving. Recent reports show a slight decrease in the number of homeless people in LA County compared to the previous year. Some news reports even use phrases like significant progress and positive signs, giving the impression that the city had found a way out of one of America's most difficult problems. But just step outside, from Broadway to the small streets of Koreatown, and the truth reveals a completely different picture. Denser tent cities, RVs, parked all over the sidewalks, and cities within cities, springing up right next to supermarkets, churches, and schools. There's a paradox. A decrease in statistics doesn't mean things are actually better. Some experts point out that current counting methods often miss many groups of people, especially those living temporarily in cars, parking lots, or mobile tent communities. That is, when the report says down 3 to 4%, in reality, the streets might be seeing more than that. In fact, the federal government admitted in 2023 that data collection on homelessness is always subject to significant bias due to varying resources and approaches across counties and cities. The media, in many cases, inadvertently becomes part of the story. Major newspapers, which rely on government releases, often report in a way that highlights the positive aspects. A headline with the phrase, "reducing homelessness," is easily perceived as successful and encourages confidence. But it overlooks the detail that 72,000 people still live on the streets, facing the daily risk of illness, crime, and violence. For them, a few percentage points of decline didn't change reality. a cold evening still meant only a thin blanket and a makeshift tent. Several solutions have been tested: increasing funding for social housing, boosting mental health services, or housing first programs, providing housing first and then considering reintegration. However, independent organizations argue that the scale is still too small to have a noticeable impact. Major companies have already entered the game, such as Google, which announced a $0 million housing investment fund in California to ease supply pressure. These moves can be seen as an important piece of the puzzle. But will they be enough to turn the tide of the entire crisis? When data is presented as an achievement, but the streets tell a different story, it's easy to fall into a state of skepticism. What is the truth? A few percentage points down, or the sight of thousands of people huddled right under the Hollywood neon lights? If the numbers on paper can improve, but the streets are increasingly deteriorating, what truly defines a city's progress? And if 72,000 people are still wandering every night, what number could truly bring them a home? A city is often defined not only by its skyscrapers or the numbers in budget reports, but also by the silent stories of the people within it. And in Los Angeles today, those stories seem to pile up into a chain of tragedies, where each loss leads to another, extending into a seemingly endless spiral. Let's start with an image that's hard to shake. A veteran who served for many years in the military, returning with the belief that the country wouldn't abandon him. However, he was sleeping in an old car parked outside a supermarket. Every night, he feared the police knocking on his door or a group of drunken youths coming to cause trouble. He is not alone. According to the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, in 2023, nearly 40% of the homeless population nationwide were elderly or disabled individuals, the most vulnerable groups. Another story is about a woman who worked for over 3 decades in a garment factory. When the company laid off employees, she received her final paycheck and a good luck wish. Now, she shares a makeshift room in an old warehouse with no hot water, no kitchen, and no privacy. "I've worked my whole life, but in the end I have nothing left," she said with empty eyes. Or an elderly couple who used to own a small apartment in the suburbs. After medical expenses exceeded their means, they were forced to sell their house to pay off the debt. Now they live in an RV parked in a Walmart parking lot, using old curtains for a bit of privacy. They called it home, but deep down, they knew it was just a temporary stop before things slid even lower again. These real-life slices not only expose the pain of each individual, but also reflect a bitter truth. The homeless are not always the outcasts, as society often imagines. They were once workers, nurses, teachers, and even former soldiers. They once paid taxes, raised families, and believed in the promise of the American dream. But when the economic storm swept through, when the wave of layoffs rolled in, they were the ones left behind in the end. Tragedy continues to follow tragedy in another aspect: stigma. The homeless are seen as shadows that blight the streets, rather than as human beings trying to survive. Some people recount that they were frequently chased away, cursed, and even considered a danger. Instead of empathy, they have to bear the additional emotional burden of community ostracism. In that context, many organizations have tried to fill the void. Housing First programs, which provide housing before supporting reintegration, are considered an evidence-based solution. Some large corporations, such as Google and Amazon, have previously announced investments in affordable housing in California, aiming to alleviate pressure on the market. Nevertheless, the scale of these efforts is still too small compared to the ever-widening wave of crises. Because after all, numbers or press releases are just the surface. What remains after all is the stories left behind, the people who once belonged to the system, but are now forgotten by it. And it is these very stories that will shape the collective memory of a city. Not about the dazzling lights of Hollywood, but about the shadows that stretch across makeshift tents. If someone can work their whole life and still lose everything, what guarantee is there for future generations? And if these heartbreaking stories continue to be left behind, what future awaits the city once dubbed the paradise of the American dream? A crisis has never stopped at the borders of a city. What's happening in Los Angeles today could be just the first domino in a larger game, where each fall pushes a series of other cities into a similar spiral. When a major city like Los Angeles collapses, the shockwaves don't just affect local residents. It also undermines the confidence of an entire economic and political system. Companies are experiencing labor unrest and rising living costs, forcing many small businesses to close. Migrant workers are moving to other states, bringing with them discontent and adding pressure to places that are not yet prepared. Every city, every community becomes a potential pawn in a series of cascading collapses. Another perspective. The problems of Los Angeles are not isolated, but reflect the entire American landscape. Housing prices are skyrocketing, wages aren't keeping pace, student loan and credit card debt are ballooning, and technology, particularly artificial intelligence, is replacing a multitude of traditional jobs. More than 100,000 jobs in the US manufacturing sector disappeared in July 2025 alone, according to national economic reports. Those numbers are not just data, but a sign that falls are multiplying. If the sight of crowded tents under the Hollywood lights is haunting in Los Angeles, similar versions are also appearing in other cities. In Philadelphia, many streets have become open-air dangerous product markets, causing community unrest. In Seattle, the homelessness wave is spreading from the city center to the suburbs. And in Austin, a city often touted as a new tech destination, residents are also seeing long lines of RVs parked along the highway. This is no longer a local issue, but a composite picture of an America on the brink of a humanitarian crisis. In that situation, some major corporations began to get involved. Amazon previously announced a program to build affordable housing for employees and the community in the Pacific Northwest. Google is deploying a multi-million-dollar fund to develop housing projects in California. These steps can be considered efforts to prevent a domino effect from spreading, although the scale is still modest compared to the actual crisis. Will solutions from businesses be enough to fill the gap that an entire public system has yet to overcome? And if Los Angeles is just the first domino, which city will be the next one in the cascade rolling forward? Today, Los Angeles is not just a city with dazzling Hollywood lights, but also a mirror reflecting deep cracks within the heart of America. From a billion-budget deficit to thousands of families being pushed onto the streets, stories followed one after another as proof of a reality that couldn't be hidden by a few percentage points of decrease. The makeshift tents and RVs crammed along the sidewalks. They're not just shelter, but also a symbol of a dream that's cracking day by day. And then, the most haunting question remains. If even those with stable jobs can easily become homeless, what awaits the rest of us? If Los Angeles is just the first domino, who will be the next victim when the others fall one by one? If you think these stories need to be heard more, please share the video so more people can learn about them. Don't forget to leave your comments in the section below. In your opinion, what is the root cause of Los Angeles and many other American cities falling into this spiral? And as always, if you want to continue joining us on this journey to explore the hidden corners of America today, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because perhaps tomorrow's story will have even more things for us to ponder. The content in this video is based on public information sources, statistical data, and independent analytical perspectives. All data and citations used are for reference purposes only and are subject to change over time. The video is not intended to assign responsibility to any individual, organization, or government. This is not financial, legal, or policy advice, but is intended solely for informational purposes and to stimulate reflection for the audience. Viewers are encouraged to verify further from reputable sources before forming their own opinions.